Hello everyone, I am Victor. Welcome back to AK Next Gen Vibes. In this video, we will understand one of the most important concepts behind international payments, correspondent banking. We will learn why banks need correspondent relationships, what Nostro and Vostro accounts are, and how payment instructions and settlement work across borders. Let's begin. A bank may need to make payments in another country, in another currency, or through a payment system where it does not have direct access. Instead of maintaining a direct presence or payment system access in every market, a bank can use the services of another bank. This is one of the key reasons correspondent banking relationships are important in international payments. Correspondent banking is an arrangement in which one bank provides banking services to another bank. The bank providing the services is known as the correspondent bank, while the bank receiving those services is known as the respondent bank. These services may include holding accounts, processing payments, providing access to payment or clearing arrangements, and supporting foreign currency transactions. Let's understand these two terms with a simple example. Suppose Bank A needs US dollar payment services, and Bank B provides Bank A with an account and related payment services. In this relationship, Bank A is the respondent bank because it receives the services. Bank B is the correspondent bank because it provides those services. A bank may maintain multiple correspondent relationships depending on the currencies and markets it needs to access. Now let's compare different payment routes. In a simpler route, a payment may move from the sender through Bank A to Bank B and then to the beneficiary. However, when the required direct relationship or access is not available, one or more correspondent or intermediary banks may be involved. The exact route, therefore, depends on the bank's relationships, accounts, and access to the relevant payment infrastructure. A typical cross-border payment may involve several parties. The journey starts with the ordering customer, or sender. The instruction then goes to the sending bank. Depending on the payment route, one or more correspondent or intermediary banks may be involved. The payment ultimately reaches the beneficiary bank, which credits the beneficiary according to the applicable payment process. Remember, not every international payment follows exactly the same route. Now let's understand the term Nostro. Nostro is traditionally explained as our account with you. Suppose Bank A maintains an account with Bank B. From Bank A's perspective, this account is its Nostro account. The important point is that the account itself is maintained on the books of the bank providing the account service. Now consider the same banking relationship from Bank B's perspective. Bank A has an account maintained on Bank B's books. From Bank B's perspective, this is a Vostro account. Vostro is traditionally explained as your account with us. So Bank A views the relationship as Nostro, while Bank B views the corresponding account relationship as Vostro. Nostro and Vostro, different perspectives. This is the most important point to remember. Nostro and Vostro should not automatically be understood as two completely separate accounts. They commonly describe the same account relationship from the perspectives of the two banks involved. Bank A says, our account with Bank B, and calls it Nostro. Bank B says, Bank A's account with us, and refers to it as Vostro. The terminology depends on whose perspective we are considering. Practical USD payment example. Let's look at a simplified example. Suppose a customer of Bank A wants to send US dollars to a beneficiary whose account is with Bank B. Bank A receives the customer's payment instruction and initiates the required payment process. Depending on the correspondent relationships and payment infrastructure available, the payment may be routed through one or more correspondent banks before reaching Bank B. Bank B then credits the beneficiary according to the applicable process. The exact account movements depend on the actual correspondent relationships used, so this should be understood as a conceptual example rather than a universal payment route. Swift message versus settlement. Now we come to a critical distinction. Swift messaging and settlement are not the same thing. Swift can carry financial messages containing payment instructions between financial institutions. Settlement, however, involves the relevant accounts and payment infrastructure used by the banks in the payment chain. In simple terms, Swift helps communicate the payment information, while the banking relationships and payment systems support the required account updates and settlement process. Remember this clearly. Messaging is not the same as settlement. How correspondent settlement works conceptually. Let's understand the process conceptually. First, the customer provides a payment instruction to Bank A. Bank A sends the appropriate payment instruction. The banks involved in the payment chain process and route that instruction. As the payment is settled, the relevant accounts used in the correspondent and payment arrangements are debited and credited. The payment reaches the beneficiary bank, and the beneficiary is then credited according to the applicable payment process. So, money does not literally travel physically from one country to another. The payment is reflected through account updates across the relevant banking and payment infrastructure. When multiple correspondent banks are involved, sometimes Bank A does not have the required relationship to reach Bank B through a simpler route. In such cases, the payment may pass through more than one correspondent or intermediary institution. For example, the route could involve Bank A, Correspondent Bank 1, Correspondent Bank 2, and finally Bank B. As the payment chain becomes longer, more institutions may process the payment, additional compliance checks may occur, fees may potentially arise, and overall processing may become more complex. MT103 and Correspondent Banking. Now let's connect Correspondent Banking with a traditional SWIFT FIN MT103 customer credit transfer. The MT103 contains information required to process the customer payment. Two relevant party fields, where applicable, are Field 56A and Field 57A. Field 56A represents the intermediary institution and is used when an intermediary institution needs to be identified in the payment route. Field 57A represents the account with institution and identifies the institution servicing the beneficiary's account or the institution through which that account is serviced, depending on the payment structure. An important point to remember is that Field 56A is not present in every MT103. It is used where applicable to the payment route. Serial versus cover payment. At a high level, correspondent payments can use different payment methods. In the serial method, the customer payment instruction is passed from one bank to the next along the payment chain. Conceptually, this could be Bank A, then an intermediary bank, and then Bank B. In a cover payment arrangement, the customer payment information and the related interbank funds transfer instruction follow distinct but related message paths. Traditionally, this can involve an MT103 for the customer payment information and an MT202 COV through the correspondent banking chain for the cover payment. Serial and cover payments are detailed topics, so we will explore them separately in a dedicated video. Charges are SHA and BEN. For an MT103, Field 71A indicates how transaction charges are allocated. With R, the charges are borne by the ordering customer, subject to the applicable payment arrangement. With SHA, the ordering customer and the beneficiary bear their respective sides' charges. With BEN, the charges are borne by the beneficiary. However, selecting R alone should not be treated as an absolute guarantee of a specific amount being received in every situation. Actual processing can depend on the payment route, services used, agreements, and applicable rules. Complete end-to-end flow. Now let's bring everything together. The payment journey begins with the sender. The sender provides an instruction to the sending bank. The payment information is communicated through the appropriate messaging channel. Depending on the route, correspondent or intermediary banks may be involved. The required account updates and settlement take place through the relevant banking relationships and payment infrastructure. The payment then reaches the beneficiary bank, and the beneficiary is credited according to the applicable process. The key concept is simple. SWIFT communicates payment information. Banking relationships and payment infrastructures enable settlement. Common misconceptions. Before we finish, let's correct some common misconceptions. First, SWIFT does not physically move money. It provides secure financial messaging services, while settlement occurs through the relevant banking and payment arrangements. Second, not every international payment requires exactly one correspondent bank. Depending on the route, there may be no intermediary, one intermediary, or multiple institutions. Third, Nostro and Vostro commonly describe the same account relationship from different banking perspectives. And finally, not every MT103 contains Field 56A. Intermediary institution information is included when applicable to the payment route. Summary. Let's quickly summarize what we learned today. We understood correspondent banking and the difference between correspondent and respondent banks. We learned why banks use correspondent relationships and how direct and correspondent payment routes can differ. We explored Nostro and Vostro accounts and understood that these terms represent different perspectives on an account relationship. We also distinguished Swift messaging from settlement, discussed correspondent payment chains, introduced MT103 Fields 56A and 57A, and briefly explored serial and cover payments. Finally, we understood how our SHA and BEN indicate the allocation of payment charges. Thank you for watching. I hope this video helped you understand correspondent banking and Nostro and Vostro accounts more clearly. If you found this video useful, please like, share, and subscribe to AK Next Gen Vibes for more banking and Swift tutorials. See you in the next video.